Why does God forbid Moses from entering the Promised Land? The biblical story described in the book of Numbers, chapter 20, describes an incident during which Moses struck the rock. After leaving Egypt and during the wanderings in the desert, the Israelites faced a lack of water. Frustrated and thirsty, they complained to Moses and Aaron, claiming they had led them to the desert to die. In response, Moses and Aaron turned to God to ask for guidance. Moses was instructed to gather the people in front of a rock and speak to it, so that water would flow. But something made Moses get confused and deviate from the instructions. Instead of speaking to the rock, he struck it twice with his staff and water poured out. Despite the success, God was angry because Moses broke his specific command. Moses, as the leader of the people and God's messenger, failed. Even though Moses almost begs God for forgiveness, God refuses. What were the other reasons that caused God to forbid his entry? After taking the people out of Egypt and suffering in the desert with them, Moses is informed that he will not enter the Promised Land. At that time I pleaded with the Lord, Sovereign Lord, you have begun to show to your servant your greatness and your strong hand. For what God is there in heaven or on earth who can do the deeds and mighty works you do? Let me go over and see the good land beyond the Jordan, that fine hill country and Lebanon. Deuteronomy 3 verses 23 to 25. Moses was ordered not to enter the land, and his prayer for this was evident. In his pain, Moses tirelessly pleads like one of the people before God to tear up the decree, until God commands him to stop his prayers. But because of you the Lord was angry with me and would not listen to me. Deuteronomy 3 verses 26. Moses travels a long way until he reaches this point. From Pharaoh's house to observing the suffering of the people, until he became a leader and messenger for God and the people. His request is not unequivocal for the cancellation of the punishment, he simply wants to journey and see the Promised Land as a desire to finish what he started. Clearly, Moses is frustrated. After all the sins he committed were the result of the people, so he expects to be forgiven, and even if he does not enter as leader of the people, just seeing it is enough for him. The familiar explanation is that Moses did not enter the land because of a sin he committed, which was striking the rock, and did not speak to it. Let's take a closer look at this sin. Moses is in trouble, he has to water the people. He turns to God and receives instructions. Take the staff, and you and your brother Aaron gather the assembly together. Speak to that rock before their eyes and it will pour out its water. You will bring water out of the rock for the community so they and their livestock can drink. Numbers 20 verse 8. However, Moses does not follow the instructions as instructed. Then Moses raised his arm and struck the rock twice with his staff. Water gushed out, and the community and their livestock drank. Numbers 20 verse 11. He and Aaron were commanded to speak to the rock, but Moses struck the rock. It could be understood from his actions that perhaps he does not believe that talking to the rock is enough, but a physical blow. And for that, he was punished, showing distrust towards God in front of the Israelites, causing them not to have faith in God. A leader of Moses' stature has unique rules, he must oblige to behave properly and obey the instructions. He is obliged to his senders. Deviation or failure to fulfill instructions as required may cause damage to trust, and therefore the punishment is necessary. Moses was condemned to receive punishment and could not receive forgiveness and amnesty because of his position. Most of the time it appears that the reason is really the sin of the rock, but in another case, Moses says that the reason is the sin of the spies. So what is the real reason? In the book of Deuteronomy at the end of chapter 32, God says to Moses, "Go up into the Abarim range to Mount Nebo in Moab, across from Jericho, and view Canaan, the land I am giving the Israelites as their own possession. There on the mountain that you have climbed you will die and be gathered to your people, just as your brother Aaron died on Mount Hor and was gathered to his people. This is because both of you broke faith with me in the presence of the Israelites at the waters of Meribah Kadesh in the desert of Zin, and because you did not uphold my holiness among the Israelites. Therefore, you will see the land only from a distance, you will not enter the land I am giving to the people of Israel." Deuteronomy 32 verses 49 to 52. According to these verses, Moses did not enter the land following the sin of Rock. In Moses' speeches in the book of Deuteronomy, Moses mentions several times the fact that God orders him not to cross the Jordan, but he gives different reasons for this. Sometimes the fact is mentioned that this is part of a collective punishment for the sins of Israelites that caused a punishment even for their leader. For example, in Deuteronomy chapter 1, he mentions the sin of the spies. Moses points out that because of them he was also not allowed to enter the land. "Because of you the Lord became angry with me also and said, you shall not enter it either." Deuteronomy 1 verse 37. And a few chapters later in Deuteronomy 4, while he is describing the sin of the calf, Moses returns and mentions it. Still, it seems not to prove to the people, but to teach them that they will no longer have protection as in the time of the desert, since Moses is not entering the land with them, and if they sin again, they will be punished. "The Lord was angry with me because of you, and he solemnly swore that I would not cross the Jordan and enter the good land the Lord your God is giving you as your inheritance." Deuteronomy 4 verse 21. After the sin of the calf, Moses asked God to forgive the Israelites, and God granted his request. Moses adds that he wants to be forgiven for his sin as well and enter the land. It was he who led the people during both the calf's sin and the spies' sin. The Israelites paid a heavy price, because of the sin of the calf and even because of the sin of the spies, for many generations after that. The message is that God tells Moses that it is impossible for the Israelites to receive their punishment and therefore die in the desert, and not enter the land of Israel, while he, Moses, their great leader, sinned and will enter the land. Is it possible that a leader, who during his leadership, committed grave sins, will not pay for it himself? Isn't the leader responsible for the actions of his people? The point here is that the reason that Moses is not allowed to enter the land of Israel is not only due to the sin of the rock, but also as a result of the sins committed by the Israelites under his leadership, preventing him from entering the land of Israel. It seems that a reference to the words can be found in the book of Deuteronomy chapter 3 in the words of Moses to the people. "But because of you the Lord was angry with me and would not listen to me. That is enough," the Lord said. "Do not speak to me any more about this matter." Deuteronomy 3 verse 26. Moses says, "I was decreed not to enter the land because of the grave sin of rock, which was caused by my behavior." This means that the Israelites will see that even Moses did not enter the land, and this is due to his leadership responsibility for the desert generation, the ancestors of the generation that will enter the promised land. Moses played with his destiny, tried his luck, tried to be like every other person, and failed because he is not like every person. He is a leader above his level, he is a prophet, and he reached the highest rank of a person close to God. Moses was destined not to enter the land from the day he was born. He chose his way to get there. He led the people and led them as a faithful shepherd. It thus concludes the dramatic story of a leader who led his people through suffering in the desert without being allowed to enter the promised land. We hope you learned something new today. If you did, give this video a like and share it with your friends. You can share with us what you know by leaving a comment below. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more informative and entertaining content. Thank you so much and see you next time.